I still remember the day everything changed. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, the one with the leaky faucet I kept meaning to fix, staring at an envelope that had arrived that morning. My hands were shaking as I held it, because I recognized my father's lawyer's return address. It had been 3 months since Dad passed away, and I'd been dreading this moment. My name is Rebecca, and up until 2 years before that day, I thought I knew exactly who my father was. Thomas Mitchell, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who sat through every single one of my terrible middle school band concerts, who cried at my college graduation. He was my hero, my rock, the person I called when my car broke down or when I just needed to hear a familiar voice tell me everything would be okay. Then he met Vanessa. I need to back up a bit. After my mom died when I was 19, Dad was devastated. They'd been married for 25 years. High school sweethearts who never stopped holding hands. I watched him struggle through those first few years of grief, saw him slowly learn to live alone in the house where they'd raised me. By the time I graduated from college and started my own life, he seemed to have found some peace. He had his routines, his golf buddies, his Thursday night poker games. When he told me he'd started dating again at 62, I was genuinely happy for him. He deserved companionship, deserved to not spend every evening alone with his memories and the evening news. He'd met someone at a charity fundraiser, he said, a woman named Vanessa who made him laugh again. The first time I met her, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it exactly. She was younger than Dad by 15 years, which wasn't inherently a problem, but there was something about the way she looked around our family home, appraising everything. The way she touched the antique vase my grandmother had left us, running her fingers over it like she was calculating its value. But I pushed those feelings down. I told myself I was being protective, maybe even a little jealous that someone was taking Mom's place. "Rebecca," Dad said to me one evening about 6 months into their relationship, "you need to give Vanessa a real chance. She makes me happy. Isn't that what matters?" "Of course, Dad," I replied, forcing a smile. "I just want you to be careful. You've been alone for a while, and sometimes people can take advantage." His face darkened in a way I'd never seen before. "Vanessa isn't taking advantage of anyone. She loves me. And frankly, Rebecca, I'm disappointed that you can't see that. Your mother would have wanted me to be happy." That stung. Using Mom's memory as a weapon against me felt like a betrayal, but I swallowed my hurt and nodded. I didn't want to fight with him. He was all the family I had left. Over the next year, I watched Dad change. He stopped calling as often. When we did talk, Vanessa was always there, her voice in the background, commenting on everything I said. Dad started canceling our Sunday dinners, the tradition we'd maintained since Mom died. He missed my birthday for the first time in my life because he and Vanessa had taken a last-minute trip to Cabo. Then came the evening that shattered everything. Dad called me and asked me to come over. His voice sounded strange, formal, like he was reading from a script. When I arrived, Vanessa answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rebecca," she said sweetly, "your father is in the living room. He has something important to discuss with you." Dad was sitting in his armchair, the one he'd always claimed as his. He looked uncomfortable, wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Vanessa sat down on the arm of the chair, her hand on his shoulder, possessive. "Rebecca, sit down," Dad said. "I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to overreact." My stomach dropped. "Okay," I said slowly, sitting on the edge of the couch where I'd spent countless childhood evenings watching movies with my parents. "Vanessa and I are getting married," he announced. "Next month. We've decided to keep it small, just immediate family." I tried to smile, tried to be happy for him. "That's wonderful, Dad. Congratulations." "There's more," he continued, and now he did look at me, his expression almost defensive. "I've decided to update my will. Vanessa is going to be my wife, and she deserves to be taken care of. The house, my savings, the investments, they're all going to her." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. "Everything?" I managed to say. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Rebecca, surely you can understand. Your father and I are building a life together. You're young. You have your whole career ahead of you. You don't need an inheritance." "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what about Mom's things? The photo albums, her jewelry, the quilt her mother made? Those are part of the estate," Dad said stiffly. "Everything stays with the house, and the house goes to Vanessa. You'll have to understand, this is my decision." "Your decision?" I felt tears burning in my eyes. "Or her decision?" "Dad, she's been in your life for barely a year and a half. I'm your daughter. I'm your blood." Vanessa stood up abruptly. "Thomas, I think I should leave you two to talk privately." But before she left the room, She squeezed his shoulder and gave me a look that was pure triumph. Once she was gone, I tried again. Dad, please, I don't care about the money, I really don't. But Mom's things, our family memories, they should stay in our family. He shook his head. Vanessa is my family now, Rebecca. And honestly, the way you've treated her, the cold shoulder you've given her from day one, maybe it's for the best. She's been nothing but kind to you, and you've repaid her with suspicion and judgment. I've been protecting you, I burst out. Dad, can't you see what she's doing? She isolated you from me, from your friends. She's got you changing your will before you're even married. This is textbook manipulation. That's enough, he shouted, standing up. His face was red, a vein pulsing in his temple. I won't sit here and listen to you insult the woman I love. Vanessa has brought joy back into my life. She doesn't judge me or make me feel guilty for moving on. Maybe if you'd been more supportive, more welcoming, things would be different. But you made your choice, and I've made mine. I stood too, grabbing my purse with shaking hands. Fine, I said quietly. If that's how you feel, then I guess there's nothing left to say. I walked toward the door, half hoping he'd call me back, tell me he was sorry, that we could work this out. But he just stood there, silent, as I left. That was the last real conversation I had with my father. He married Vanessa 3 weeks later. I wasn't invited. I found out through a cousin who saw the wedding announcement online. I sent a card, a last desperate attempt to bridge the gap, but it went unanswered. Over the next year, I tried to reach out several times. Birthday texts that went unread. A Christmas gift left on his doorstep that was never acknowledged. I drove by the house once and saw Vanessa had redecorated the front porch, removing the swing where Dad and I used to sit on summer evenings. Even that small detail felt like an erasure of everything we'd been. My friend Julia tried to help. She'd drag me out for dinners, for movies, trying to distract me from the gaping hole in my life where my father used to be. One night, over too many glasses of wine, I broke down completely. I don't understand what happened, I sobbed. How did I lose him? Was I really that terrible to her? Should I have just smiled and pretended everything was fine? Julia held my hand across the table. Beck, you didn't do anything wrong. You tried to protect him. That's what daughters do. But what if I was wrong? What if she really does love him and I ruined everything by being suspicious? Then your dad would have fought harder to keep you in his life, Julia said firmly. People who truly love you don't give you ultimatums. They don't force you to choose. I wanted to believe her, but the guilt ate at me anyway. Every night I replayed our last conversation, wondering what I could have said differently, how I could have made him see reason without pushing him away. Then, on a Tuesday morning 14 months after Dad remarried, I got the phone call. It was Dad's neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Patterson who'd lived next door for 30 years. Rebecca? Her voice was gentle but urgent. I think you need to know. Your father had a heart attack last night. He's in the hospital. My hands went numb. Is he okay? Where is he? She gave me the hospital name and room number. I called my boss from the car, told her I had a family emergency, and drove 2 hours to the hospital where Dad had been taken. My mind raced the entire drive. Would he want to see me? Would Vanessa even let me in the room? What if I was too late? When I got to his floor, I saw Vanessa in the waiting room, on her phone. She looked up as I approached, and something flickered across her face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. Rebecca, she said, standing up. What are you doing here? I'm here to see my father, I said, trying to keep my voice level. How is he? She sighed dramatically. He's stable, but the doctors say the next 48 hours are critical. He's sleeping right now. Maybe you should come back later. I'm going in, I said, moving past her. The nurse at the desk gave me a sympathetic look and nodded toward his room. He's been asking for you, she whispered as I passed. That stopped me in my tracks. He asked for me? Every time he wakes up, the nurse said quietly. He keeps saying your name. I found Dad in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen him. His hair had gone completely white in the year since I'd last seen him. There were tubes and monitors everywhere. The steady beep of his heartbeat the only sound in the room. I pulled a chair close to his bed and took his hand carefully, trying not to disturb the IV. Dad, I whispered. It's me. It's Rebecca. I'm here. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he looked confused. Then recognition dawned, and tears started rolling down his cheeks. Beck, he whispered hoarsely. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't talk, Dad. Just rest. We can talk about everything later. No, he insisted, his grip on my hand surprisingly strong. Need to tell you. Was so stupid. Vanessa, she's not who I thought. I figured it out too late. Before he could say more, the door opened and Vanessa walked in. Her expression hardened when she saw me holding Dad's hand. Thomas, darling, you're awake. You shouldn't be exerting yourself. The doctor said you need complete rest. Want Rebecca to stay? He managed to say. Of course, but just for a few minutes, Vanessa said, her voice sticky sweet. We don't want to tire you out. I stayed by his side for 3 hours that day. Vanessa came and went, always finding reasons to interrupt when Dad tried to talk to me. He'd fall asleep, wake up, squeeze my hand, try to tell me something. But every time, Vanessa would sweep in with a nurse or a doctor or some excuse about hospital policy. Finally, around 8 that evening, a doctor came in and insisted Dad needed to rest through the night. Vanessa made a show of arranging to stay in the family room, but gave me a pointed look that said I should leave. Reluctantly, I did, but I promised Dad I'd be back first thing in the morning. I need to tell you something important, he whispered as I was leaving. Tomorrow. Promise you'll come. I promise, Dad, I'll be here. I drove to a nearby hotel and barely slept. All I could think about was the fear in his eyes, the urgency in his voice. What had he figured out about Vanessa? What did he need to tell me? The next morning, my phone rang at 6. It was the hospital. I need to speak with you immediately, the nurse said. It's about your father. My heart stopped. Is he okay? There was a pause. There's been a situation. Your father passed away about an hour ago. I'm so sorry. The room spun. That's not possible. He was stable. You said he was stable. I know, and I'm very sorry. But there's something else. Before he passed, he was very agitated. He kept insisting we call you. He said he needed to change his will, that it was urgent. He became so distressed that we had to sedate him. His heart couldn't handle the stress. I was numb. Did Vanessa call you? Did she know? Another pause. Mrs. Mitchell was here, yes. She assured us she would handle everything and that we shouldn't bother you in the middle of the night. I hung up and just sat there on the hotel bed. My father was gone. Really gone. And his last hours had been spent trying to reach me, trying to tell me something important, trying to fix whatever he'd realized was wrong. But Vanessa had been there, controlling access, managing the situation. The funeral was 2 days later. It was a cold, gray morning, the kind of day that matched the hollowness in my chest. Vanessa had arranged everything, and it was nothing like what Dad would have wanted. Fancy flowers he would have called wasteful. A generic minister who'd never met him. Readings from poems Dad had never read. I sat in the back, feeling like a stranger at my own father's funeral. After the service, as people milled around offering condolences I didn't want, I saw Vanessa holding court near the front. She was dressed in an expensive black dress, designer sunglasses perched on her head, accepting sympathy with practiced grace. Mrs. Patterson came to sit beside me. That woman is a piece of work, she said quietly. Did you know she had contractors at the house the day after Thomas went to the hospital, measuring the windows for new curtains? My stomach turned. He wasn't even gone yet. Mrs. Patterson patted my hand. Your father realized his mistake, dear. He told me so, about 2 weeks before the heart attack. He came over one evening when Vanessa was out, said he needed someone to talk to. He'd found credit card statements, charges he didn't recognize. When he confronted her, she had explanations for everything, but they didn't quite add up. He was planning to talk to a lawyer. Did he say anything else? She nodded. He said he needed to make things right with you, that he'd been a fool, that he should have listened. He was planning to file for divorce. A divorce lawyer would have been able to testify about Dad's state of mind, I thought. But now Dad was gone, and any plans he'd had died with him. 3 days after the funeral, I received the letter, the one I mentioned at the beginning, from Dad's lawyer. I sat in my apartment, the leaky faucet dripping rhythmically in the background, and opened it with shaking hands. The will was exactly as Dad had told me that awful night. Everything to Vanessa. The house, the savings, the investments, Mom's jewelry, the photo albums, everything. There was one line near the end that felt like a knife to the heart. My daughter Rebecca has shown herself to be unsupportive of my happiness and my choices. Therefore, I leave her nothing. I read those words over and over until they blurred. This couldn't be it. This couldn't be how our story ended. But I didn't have money for lawyers, didn't have proof of anything except a neighbor's story about what Dad had said. Vanessa had won. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. I threw myself into work, taking extra shifts at the marketing firm where I was an assistant account manager. I avoided talking about my father, avoided the sympathy in people's eyes when they heard he'd passed. Julia tried to help, but I pushed her away too. I felt like I was drowning in grief and regret and anger, and I didn't want to pull anyone else under with me. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in grief and family trauma. At first, I could barely talk. I'd sit in her office, surrounded by her peaceful plants and soft lighting, and just cry. She never pushed, just handed me tissues and waited. The first few sessions were brutal. I'd walk in, sit on her comfortable gray couch, and the words would just pour out in a jumbled mess. I'd talk about Mom's death, then jump to something Vanessa had said, then back to a memory of Dad teaching me to drive, then forward to the funeral. Everything was tangled together in my mind. Grief and anger and regret all knotted up so tightly I couldn't separate them. Dr. Chen would listen, taking occasional notes, never interrupting. At the end of each session, she'd say something simple like, "That must have been incredibly painful," or "I hear how much you loved him." Small validations that somehow meant everything. After about a month of these chaotic sessions, she started asking more pointed questions. "Tell me about your mother," she said one day. "What was she like?" I found myself smiling through tears. She was amazing, strong, funny, kind. She worked as an accountant, but she was so creative. She'd make up songs while she cooked, terrible rhyming songs that would make Dad and me laugh. She had this way of making even ordinary days feel special. "And your father? What was he like before Vanessa?" I closed my eyes, remembering. He was solid, like a mountain. He was the person everyone in the neighborhood called when they needed help. He'd spend his Saturdays fixing Mrs. Patterson's fence or helping the college kid down the street move furniture. He loved terrible puns, and he cried at every movie, even comedies. After Mom died, he lost some of that lightness, but he was still fundamentally good. Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "So the man who cut you out of his will, who chose Vanessa over you, that wasn't really the father you knew, was it?" The realization hit me like a wave. No, it wasn't. That was someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. She nodded. Manipulation changes people. It distorts their perception, makes them doubt their own judgment. The father you knew was still in there, Rebecca. He was just buried under layers of lies and emotional manipulation. We spent weeks unpacking that concept. Dr. Chen had me write letters to Dad that I'd never send, expressing everything I felt. Anger, hurt, love, confusion, all of it. I filled notebook after notebook, writing until my hand cramped. One particularly difficult session, I broke down completely. "I should have been smarter," I sobbed. "I should have seen this coming. I should have documented everything, recorded conversations, built a case." Dr. Chen's voice was firm but gentle. "Rebecca, you were a daughter trying to protect her father. You weren't a detective building a legal case. You did what you could with the tools you had. The fact that Vanessa was skilled at manipulation doesn't mean you failed. It means she was good at what she did. But I lost him. I lost my dad because I couldn't find the right words to make him see." "Did you lose him?" she asked. "Or did Vanessa systematically isolate him from everyone who might help him see the truth? Those are two very different things." I thought about it. She had isolated him. From his golf buddies, who'd started calling less after Vanessa made subtle comments about how they were a bad influence. From his poker night friends, who Dad stopped seeing after Vanessa scheduled regular trips on those nights. From his church community, which Dad drifted away from after Vanessa said she found organized religion oppressive. "She isolated him from everyone," I said slowly. "Not just me. Everyone who cared about him." "Exactly. That's textbook manipulation. She cut off his support system so he'd be dependent on her. You couldn't have prevented that, Rebecca. She was working on multiple fronts, and she was experienced. This wasn't her first time." Eventually, I started to open up more deeply. About Mom's death, about watching Dad grieve, about Vanessa and the will and the horrible last months, about the guilt that ate at me every day, about the nightmares I'd been having where Dad was calling for me but I couldn't reach him. "Do you think you could have done anything differently?" Dr. Chen asked me one day. "I should have been nicer to Vanessa," I said automatically. "I should have tried harder to make Dad see I was happy for him." "Let me ask you something else," she said gently. "If a friend came to you and told you their parent had cut them off because their new partner demanded it, what would you tell them?" I thought about it. I'd tell them it wasn't their fault, that they were being manipulated. "And would you tell them they should have been nicer to the person manipulating their parent?" I saw what she was doing. "No," I admitted. "I'd tell them they did the right thing by trying to protect their parent." "Then why are you holding yourself to a different standard?" That question broke something open in me. I cried harder than I had since Dad died, but it was different. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was the beginning of letting go of the guilt. Over the following months, Dr. Chen helped me work through each stage of grief. We talked about denial, the way I'd kept expecting Dad to call and apologize. We talked about anger, the rage I felt at Vanessa, but also at Dad for not seeing through her. We talked about bargaining, all the what-ifs that kept me up at night. We talked about depression, the darkness that had consumed me after his death. And slowly, painfully, we started talking about acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean you're okay with what happened, Dr. Chen explained. It means you're accepting reality as it is, not as you wish it had been. Your father made choices under manipulation. He hurt you deeply. He also loved you. All of these things can be true at once. How do I hold all of that? I asked. How do I accept that he loved me but still chose her? By understanding that love and manipulation can coexist. He loved you, and he was being manipulated. His actions in those final months don't erase all the years before. They're part of the story, but they're not the whole story. Dr. Chen helped me work through the stages of grief, helped me understand that I could be angry at Dad and still love him, that I could mourn what we'd had while accepting that he'd made his own choices. Slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild my life. I threw myself into my career with new focus. If I wasn't going to have an inheritance, I needed to build my own security. I took night classes in digital marketing, learned everything I could about social media strategy and analytics. Within 6 months, I'd been promoted to account manager. 6 months after that, senior account manager. Work became my refuge, the one place where I had control, where I could see the results of my efforts. But it wasn't just about escape. Something had shifted in me after those months of therapy. I found myself taking risks I never would have taken before. I pitched ideas in meetings that I would have previously kept to myself. I volunteered for challenging projects that scared me. It was like losing Dad had stripped away some fear of failure. What was the worst that could happen? I'd already survived the worst. My boss, a sharp woman named Catherine who'd always seen potential in me, noticed the change. "Rebecca," she said one day, pulling me into her office, "I don't know what's happened to you in the past year, but you're on fire. I want you to lead the Henderson account. It's our biggest client, and I think you're ready." The Henderson account was worth millions. It was the kind of opportunity that could make or break a career. The old me would have hesitated, made excuses about not being experienced enough. The new me looked Catherine in the eye and said, "I won't let you down." I threw everything into that account. I worked late nights and early mornings, building campaigns, analyzing data, refining strategies. My team responded to my energy, working just as hard. We created something brilliant, a social media campaign that went viral in the best way, driving sales up by 40% in the first quarter. Catherine called me into her office again. "That presentation you gave to Henderson? The CEO specifically asked for you to stay on his account permanently. He said you're the best thing that's happened to his brand in a decade." She slid a paper across her desk. "This is your new salary as senior account manager. You've earned it." I looked at the number and felt tears prick my eyes. It was more than I'd ever imagined making. More than enough to not just survive, but to build a real life. Julia stuck by me even when I was at my worst. She celebrated my promotions, dragged me out when I was working too much, and never once said "I told you so" about Dad. When I finally felt ready to date again, she set me up with her boyfriend's friend Marcus, a high school teacher with kind eyes and a terrible sense of humor. We went on a few dates, and while nothing serious developed, it felt good to remember I could still connect with people. The night I got my promotion, Julia insisted on taking me out to celebrate. We went to this fancy restaurant downtown, the kind of place we used to joke we'd go to when we were rich and successful. Except now, I could actually afford it. "Look at you," Julia said, raising her glass. "From drowning in grief to absolutely crushing it at work. I'm so proud of you, Beck." "I couldn't have done it without you," I said honestly. "You kept me afloat when I was sinking." She shook her head. "No, you did that yourself. I just reminded you that you knew how to swim." But the success at work also brought unexpected complications. My coworkers started treating me differently, some with respect, others with envy. One woman, Jennifer, who'd been friendly before, turned cold. I heard her in the break room one day talking to another coworker. "Must be nice," Jennifer said, not bothering to lower her voice, "to not have any obligations. No husband, no kids, nothing but time to work. Some of us have actual lives." Her words stung more than they should have. I wanted to tell her about Dad, about the gaping hole in my life where family used to be, about how work was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. But I didn't. I just grabbed my coffee and walked away. That night, I talked about it with Dr. Chen. "Why does it bother me so much?" I asked. "Why do I care what she thinks?" "Because you're still processing loss," Dr. Chen said. You're still figuring out who you are without your father. And when someone implies that you chose work over family, it touches that wound. You didn't choose this, Rebecca. You're making the best of a painful situation. I also started building a life outside of work, slowly and deliberately. Marcus and I had become genuine friends, even though the romance didn't work out. He introduced me to his hiking group, and I found myself spending weekends on trails, pushing my body up mountains, clearing my head in nature. The physical exhaustion was different from the emotional exhaustion I'd been carrying. It was cleaner, simpler. One Saturday, we were hiking this particularly brutal trail, and I was struggling. My legs were burning, my lungs screaming. I thought about giving up, turning back, but then I thought about everything else I'd survived. If I could survive losing Dad twice, I could survive this mountain. I made it to the summit, and the view was breathtaking. I stood there looking out over the valley below, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not in what I'd accomplished professionally, but in myself, in my resilience, in my ability to keep putting one foot in front of the other even when everything hurt. I moved out of my tiny apartment into a better place, one with functioning plumbing and a dishwasher and windows that let in actual sunlight. I adopted a cat from the shelter, a grumpy orange tabby I named Mango, who sat on my lap while I worked from home and judged me silently when I stayed up too late. Small things, but they felt like victories. 2 years after Dad died, I was in a meeting when my phone started buzzing insistently. I ignored it the first few times, but whoever was calling was persistent. During a break, I checked and saw 6 missed calls from an unknown number and 2 voicemails. Something about the urgency made my stomach clench. I stepped into the hallway and listened to the first message. It was Vanessa, her voice high and panicked. Nothing like the smooth, controlled tone I remembered. "Rebecca, it's Vanessa. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need your help. Please, it's urgent. Call me back as soon as you get this." The second message was even more frantic. "Rebecca, please. I'm begging you. I don't know who else to call. Your father. There's something about your father, something I found. I need to talk to you immediately. Please." I stood there in the hallway of my office building, phone pressed to my ear, completely blindsided. Vanessa was calling me. Vanessa was begging me for help. After everything she'd done, after taking everything from me, after keeping me from my father in his last moments, my first instinct was to delete the messages and block her number. Let her deal with whatever crisis had erupted in her perfect stolen life. But something in her voice, that raw panic, made me pause. What could she possibly have found about Dad? What could be so urgent that she'd swallow her pride and call me? I went back into the meeting, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was Vanessa's voice, the genuine fear in it. When the meeting finally ended, I went to my office, closed the door, and stared at my phone for a long time. Julia was the voice of reason when I called her. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "Beck, do not call that woman back. This is probably some scheme to get money out of you or make herself look good. Do not engage." "But what if it's really about Dad? What if she found something important? Then she can take it to a lawyer or the police or literally anyone else. You don't owe her anything. She took everything from you, remember?" "I know, but..." I trailed off because I didn't know how to explain the feeling in my gut. Something was pulling me toward this, toward finding out what Vanessa had discovered. Against Julia's advice, against my better judgment, I called Vanessa back. She answered on the first ring. "Rebecca, oh thank God. Thank you for calling back." "What do you want, Vanessa?" I kept my voice cold, controlled. "I need to see you in person. I can't explain over the phone. Can you come to the house? Please, it's important." The house, my childhood home, the place I'd been banned from for 2 years. "Are you kidding me right now?" "I know how this sounds," she said, and I could hear her taking shaky breaths. "I know you have every reason to hate me, but I swear this is about your father. I found something, and I don't know what to do. Please, Rebecca. I'm scared." That last admission got to me. Vanessa, admitting she was scared, asking me for help. What could possibly have shaken her that much? "Fine," I said. "I'll come tomorrow evening after work. But Vanessa, if this is some kind of trick, if you're wasting my time, I swear." "It's not," she interrupted. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up feeling like I'd just made a terrible mistake. All night, I second-guessed myself. I called Julia back and told her what I'd done. She made me promise to text her when I got to the house, and to call her immediately if anything felt wrong. The next evening, I drove the familiar route to my childhood home. It was strange pulling into the driveway, seeing the house where I'd grown up but feeling like a stranger. The porch swing was still gone. Vanessa's expensive car sat in the driveway where Dad's old Buick used to be. I sat in my car for a full minute, gathering courage, before finally walking to the front door. Vanessa answered immediately, like she'd been watching for me. I barely recognized her. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the two since Dad died. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I know you didn't have to." I walked into my childhood home and felt my chest tighten. The living room had been completely redecorated. Gone were the comfortable, worn furniture and family photos. Everything was sleek, modern, impersonal. It looked like a magazine spread, beautiful but cold. Nothing of my father remained visible. Vanessa saw me looking around. "I know," she said quietly. "I changed everything. I thought that's what I wanted." "Where's what you wanted to show me?" I asked, not ready to engage with her on any personal level. She led me upstairs to what used to be Dad's study. That room, at least, looked relatively unchanged. His desk was still there, his bookshelves, his old leather chair. Vanessa went to the desk and pulled out a box. It was wooden, intricately carved, and I recognized it immediately. It had been my grandfather's, and Dad had kept it locked on his desk for as long as I could remember. "I found this last week," Vanessa said, her hands shaking as she held it. I was finally going through some of Thomas's things I'd been avoiding. I found the key taped under one of the desk drawers. Inside was this. She opened the box and pulled out a stack of papers. At first glance, they looked like legal documents. But as Vanessa spread them out on the desk, I saw what they were. A new will, dated 3 weeks before Dad died. Handwritten notes about meeting with a divorce lawyer. A letter addressed to me. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What is this?" Vanessa's voice broke. "It's proof that I'm a terrible person, that your father was trying to fix everything before he died, that I kept you from him when he needed you most." I picked up the letter addressed to me with trembling hands. The envelope was sealed. Dad's handwriting on the front said, "For Rebecca, to be opened in the event of my death." I looked at Vanessa. "You haven't read this?" She shook her head. "I couldn't. It felt wrong. It's yours." I sat down in Dad's old chair and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were 3 pages, front and back, in Dad's familiar handwriting. My vision blurred with tears as I started to read. "My dearest Rebecca," the letter began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I pray you'll give me the chance to explain. I know I hurt you terribly, and I know saying I'm sorry isn't nearly enough, but I need you to understand what happened and why I'm trying to fix it now, before it's too late." He went on to explain everything. How Vanessa had seemed perfect at first, attentive and caring, making him feel young again. How slowly, so slowly he didn't notice at first, she'd started isolating him from his friends, from me. How she'd convinced him I was judgmental, that I was trying to control his life, that I didn't want him to be happy. "I was lonely, Rebecca," he wrote. "After your mother died, I was so lonely, and Vanessa made that loneliness go away. But loneliness makes you stupid. It makes you vulnerable. And I was both." He described how he'd started noticing small things that didn't add up. Money missing from accounts. Expensive purchases he didn't remember making. Vanessa taking phone calls in private and being evasive when he asked who called. He'd hired a private investigator, he wrote, and what they found made him sick. Vanessa wasn't her real name. She'd been married twice before, both times to older, wealthy men. Both times, she'd convinced them to change their wills, to cut out their children. Both times, she'd walked away with substantial inheritances. She'd been arrested once for fraud but had pled down to a misdemeanor. The investigator had found 5 other men she'd scammed before marriage, convincing them to loan her money or co-sign on purchases before disappearing. "I'm a fool," Dad wrote. "I'm an old fool who fell for a pretty face and a convincing story. But Rebecca, my darling daughter, I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. Even when I was angry, even when I said those terrible things, you were always my little girl. I just couldn't see clearly. She had me so twisted up, I couldn't tell which way was up anymore." He wrote that he'd confronted Vanessa with the investigator's findings. She'd cried, she'd promised to change, she'd spun elaborate explanations. But he'd already made his decision. He was filing for divorce. He was changing his will back. He was going to call me and beg my forgiveness, even though he didn't deserve it. "I was planning to do it the day after tomorrow," he wrote. "I've scheduled a meeting with my lawyer to finalize everything, and then I'm going to drive to your apartment and camp on your doorstep until you agree to talk to me. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you if that's what it takes." But if something happens before I can make this right, I need you to know the truth. Vanessa isn't who she claims to be. The will I signed giving her everything was signed under false pretenses when I was being manipulated. This new will, the one with this letter, leaves everything to you as it always should have been. The house, the money, all of it. It's yours, Rebecca. Everything of mine and your mother's belongs to you. The letter ended with one final paragraph that broke me completely. I'm so proud of you, Rebecca. I'm proud of the woman you've become, strong and principled and brave. You tried to protect me, and I punished you for it. That's going to haunt me for whatever time I have left. But please, please, forgive me. You're my greatest achievement, my brightest light. You've always been the best thing I ever did. I love you more than words can say. Dad. I sat there crying, holding the letter, feeling like my father had reached across death to hug me one more time. All this time, I'd been so angry, so hurt, thinking he'd chosen Vanessa over me. But he'd figured it out. He'd been trying to fix it. If he'd only had a few more days, if his heart hadn't given out before he could make things right, everything would have been different. I don't know how long I sat there before I realized Vanessa was crying too, sitting on the floor against the bookshelf, her shoulders shaking. When I finally looked at her, really looked at her, I saw something I'd never expected to see. Genuine remorse. He was going to divorce me, she said quietly. I knew it. That last week, he was so cold, so distant. I knew I'd pushed too hard, gotten too greedy, but I couldn't help myself. It's what I do. It's who I am. Why are you showing me this? I asked. You could have destroyed these documents. You inherited everything legally. I could never prove you manipulated him. Why give this to me? She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Because I can't do it anymore. For 2 years, I've been living in this house, surrounded by things that aren't mine, knowing I took them from you. From someone who actually loved Thomas, who he actually loved. I kept telling myself I earned it, that I made him happy for a while. But I wake up every night and I hear him. I swear I hear him walking around, and I know it's just my guilt, but I can't take it anymore. So this is about your guilty conscience? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. Yes, she said simply. I'm a terrible person, Rebecca. I've done terrible things to a lot of people. But keeping you from your father when he was dying, that's the worst thing I've ever done. I watched him asking for you. Watched him trying to tell the nurses to call you, and I told them not to bother you, that he was just confused from the medication. I let him die thinking he couldn't fix things with you. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her she was right, that she was a monster. But looking at her, broken and honest for maybe the first time in her life, I just felt tired. Tired of the anger, tired of the grief, tired of it all. What do you want from me, Vanessa? She pulled out another stack of papers from the box. I had a lawyer draw these up. It's a legal transfer of all the assets. The house, the accounts, everything. I'm signing it all back to you. It's what Thomas wanted. It's what should have happened all along. I stared at the papers. Just like that? You're giving up everything? I can't keep living like this, she said. I thought having all this money, this house, this life, that it would make me happy. But I'm miserable. I'm more miserable than I've ever been. And for the first time in my life, I realize it's because I actually feel bad about what I did. She laughed bitterly. Turns out I do have a conscience after all. It just took destroying a dying man's relationship with his daughter to activate it. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't how I'd imagined this going. I'd expected a fight, expected to have to lawyer up, to spend years in court trying to prove Dad had been manipulated. I'd never expected Vanessa to just hand it all back. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Vanessa continued. I don't deserve it, but I needed to make this right, even if it's just this one thing in my whole terrible life. So please, take these papers, sign them, take back what's yours, and let me try to figure out how to be a person who doesn't destroy lives for a living. I picked up the papers, read through them. They looked legitimate. A full transfer of all assets Dad had left to Vanessa, redirected to me. The house, the bank accounts, the investment portfolio, everything. It was exactly what Dad's letter said he'd wanted to do. I'll need to have my lawyer look at these, I said carefully. Of course, Vanessa said. I understand. I also wrote out a statement, witnessed and notarized, admitting that I manipulated Thomas into changing his original will. Your lawyer can use it if there are any legal challenges. Why are you doing all this? I asked again. You could just sell the house, take the money, disappear like you've apparently done before. Why tell me any of this? She was quiet for a long moment. "Because I loved him," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "That's the really screwed up part. I went into this like I've done all the others, planning to play a part, to get what I could and get out. But Thomas, your dad, he was so kind. He was so genuinely good. And somewhere along the way, I actually fell in love with him, which made what I was doing even worse, because I kept doing it anyway. I couldn't help myself. And then he figured me out, and I saw how much I'd hurt him, and I couldn't live with being the person who did that to someone I actually loved." The house was quiet except for Vanessa's quiet crying. I thought about everything Dad had taught me growing up, about compassion, about second chances, about how people were complex and capable of both good and bad. I thought about how he'd made mistakes too, how he'd hurt me, but how he'd been trying to fix them. "I need time to process all this," I said finally. "I'm going to take these documents to my lawyer. If they're legitimate, if this transfer is real, then I'll sign them. But Vanessa, after that, I don't want to see you again. Ever." She nodded. "I understand. I'll be out of the house within 30 days if the transfer goes through. I've already started packing. And I'm going to want Mom's things," I added. "Her jewelry, the photo albums, the quilt, everything you took. It's all in the attic," she said. "I couldn't touch any of it. It felt too personal. I'll make sure it's all boxed up and labeled for you." I stood up, Dad's letter still clutched in my hand. I looked around his study one more time, and for the first time in 2 years, I could feel his presence in a good way. Not haunting, not accusing, just there. Like he was telling me it was going to be okay. I left the house in a daze. I sat in my car in the driveway and called Julia. She answered immediately. "Beck, are you okay? I've been worried sick." "I'm okay," I said. "You're not going to believe what just happened." I told her everything, and she listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then she said, "Holy hell, Beck. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to call a lawyer," I said. "I'm going to make sure this is all legal and legitimate. And if it is, I'm going to take back what Dad wanted me to have." Over the next 2 weeks, my lawyer verified everything. The documents were legitimate. Vanessa's confession was legally binding. The transfer of assets was ironclad. All I had to do was sign, and everything Dad had left behind would be mine again. The day I signed the papers, my lawyer shook my head. "In 20 years of practice, I've never seen anything like this," she said. "Usually in these cases, we're fighting tooth and nail to prove manipulation." But she just handed it all back. "I think she finally grew a conscience," I said. Better late than never. 3 weeks later, I got the keys to my childhood home. Vanessa had moved out 2 days before, leaving everything clean and organized. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "All your mother's things are in the attic as promised. I also left some of Thomas's things I thought you might want, his golf clubs and his favorite chair and some books. I hope you can make this house a home again. I'm sorry for everything. Vanessa." I walked through the house slowly, room by room. It was strange seeing it empty of Vanessa's fancy furniture and cold decorations. In a way, it was like a blank canvas, ready to be filled with warmth again. I went up to the attic and found the boxes Vanessa had mentioned. True to her word, Mom's jewelry was there, carefully wrapped. The photo albums, decades of family memories I thought I'd lost forever. The quilt Mom's mother had made, the one Mom used to wrap me in when I was sick. I sat on the attic floor, surrounded by these treasures, and cried. But this time, they were different tears. Not grief or anger or regret, but something like relief, like coming home after a long, exhausting journey. Over the next few months, I slowly moved into the house and made it mine again. I kept some of Dad's furniture, the pieces that held memories. I hung up family photos, created a gallery wall in the hallway of my childhood, of Mom and Dad's wedding, of holidays and birthdays and ordinary happy moments. I put Mom's quilt on the guest bed and her favorite painting back over the mantel. I also made changes, added my own touches. I painted the walls warmer colors. I planted a garden in the backyard like Mom used to have. I adopted another cat, a shy gray tabby I named Sage, so Mango would have a companion. I set up a home office where I could work remotely sometimes. Julia came over for dinner one night, a few months after I'd moved in. We sat on the back patio, drinking wine and watching the sunset over the garden I'd planted. "This suits you," she said, gesturing at the house. "You look peaceful." "I feel peaceful," I admitted. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be." "Have you heard from Vanessa?" "No, and I don't expect to. Last I heard, she'd moved to another state. I hope she figures her life out, I really do. But I'm glad she's not my problem anymore." Julia raised her glass. "To your dad," she said. "May he rest in peace knowing you got what was rightfully yours." We clinked glasses, and I looked up at the sky, thinking about Dad. I'd framed his letter and hung it in my bedroom, where I could read it when I needed to remember that he'd never stopped loving me, that he'd been trying to fix things, that in the end, he'd chosen me. I also started going through Dad's things more carefully, his desk drawers, his closet, the boxes he'd kept in the garage. I found old birthday cards I'd made him as a kid, every single one saved and organized by year. I found a folder labeled Rebecca's Achievements with copies of every award I'd ever won, every good report card, articles I'd written for my college newspaper. He'd kept everything. It took me weeks to go through it all. I'd set aside weekend afternoons, make myself a cup of tea, and sit in Dad's study going through one box at a time. Each box was like a time capsule, revealing pieces of him I'd forgotten or never known. I found his high school yearbook, saw him as a gangly teenager with too much hair gel and a goofy smile. His friends had written messages about how he was the nicest guy in school, how he'd always help anyone with their homework, how he'd better stay in touch after graduation. I traced my finger over a photo of him in the drama club, realizing I'd never known he'd done theater. There were boxes of photos from before I was born. Mom and Dad on dates, at concerts, on road trips. They looked so young, so carefree. There was a photo of them at the beach, Mom laughing as Dad tried to body surf and completely wiped out. On the back, in Mom's handwriting, it said, "Best day ever with my best person." I found letters they'd written to each other during a summer when Dad had gone to help his sick mother, and Mom had stayed behind for work. The letters were sweet and funny and deeply romantic. Dad wrote about how he missed her laugh, how the house felt empty without her terrible singing in the shower, how he was counting the days until he could come home. Mom wrote about how proud she was of him for taking care of his mother, how that kindness was one of the 1,000 reasons she loved him, how she was planning a special welcome home for him. These weren't just my parents. They were real people who'd built a life together, who'd loved each other deeply before I ever existed. Understanding that somehow made Dad's loneliness after Mom's death more comprehensible. He'd lost his best friend, his partner, the person who'd known him since he was 17. In the back of his closet, I found another box. This one had cards and letters he and Mom had written to each other over the years. Their courtship, their engagement, early marriage, after I was born. Reading them, I got a fuller picture of who they'd been, not just as my parents, but as people. Young people in love, figuring out life together, supporting each other through hard times, celebrating good times. I found a letter Dad had written to Mom when she was pregnant with me. He wrote about how scared he was, how he didn't know if he'd be a good father, how his own dad had been distant and cold. But then he wrote, "But I look at you, and I see how much love you already have for this baby, and I know we'll figure it out together. We always do. I promise I'll be the father I wished I'd had. I'll show up for every moment. I'll never let our child doubt how much they're loved." Tears streamed down my face as I read those words. He'd kept that promise. For my entire childhood, he'd shown up. Every recital, every game, every parent-teacher conference, every tearful teenage crisis. He'd been exactly the father he'd promised Mom he'd be, right up until Vanessa had twisted everything. I found one letter Mom had written to Dad when I was about 5. She was on a business trip, and she wrote about how much she missed us. She talked about how proud she was of the father he'd become, how he made her laugh every day, how she couldn't wait to grow old with him. At the end, she wrote, "Whatever happens in life, Thomas, promise me you'll always take care of our girl. She's the best thing we ever made." Reading that, I understood something new about what had happened. Dad hadn't stopped taking care of me. Not really. Yes, he'd made terrible mistakes. Yes, he'd let Vanessa manipulate him into pushing me away. But in the end, when he'd figured out the truth, his first instinct had been to protect me again, to make sure I got what Mom would have wanted me to have. I also found a journal he'd kept in the years after Mom died. I hesitated before opening it, feeling like I was invading his privacy, but he was gone, and I needed to understand. The entries were sporadic, just occasional thoughts when the grief got too heavy. "I don't know how to do this without her," one entry read. "Everything reminds me of her. Her coffee mug in the cabinet, her side of the bed, the way the house feels too quiet without her terrible singing. I'm trying to be strong for Rebecca, but some days I don't want to get out of bed." Another entry, dated about a year after Mom's death. "Rebecca seems to be doing okay. She's strong, like her mother. I worry she's taking care of me instead of processing her own grief. I need to be better. I need to show her it's okay to move forward." Then, dated about 6 months before he met Vanessa. "I'm so lonely. I never understood what that word really meant before. It's not just being alone. It's feeling like there's no one who really sees you anymore. Rebecca has her own life now, as she should. I'm proud of her. But I miss having a partner, someone to share the mundane moments with. The entries stopped after he met Vanessa. But tucked in the back of the journal was one more letter, dated about a week before his heart attack. This one was addressed to Mom. I messed up, Linda, it read. I messed up so badly. I let loneliness make me stupid, and I hurt our girl. The girl you made me promise to always protect. I'm going to fix it. I swear to you, I'm going to make this right. I'm going to be the man you believed I could be again. I hope you can forgive me. I hope Rebecca can forgive me. I hope I can forgive myself. Dr. Chen helped me work through all these complicated feelings in therapy. Grief isn't linear, she reminded me. You're going to feel angry at him sometimes and sad and grateful, all mixed together. That's normal. That's healthy. What if I can't fully forgive him? I asked. What if part of me is always hurt by what he did? Then that's okay too, she said. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending it didn't hurt. It means making peace with the fact that people are complex, that they make mistakes, and choosing not to let those mistakes define your entire relationship. I started having Sunday dinners again, inviting Julia and Marcus and some other friends. I'd cook in Mom's kitchen, using her old recipes, and we'd sit around the dining room table where I'd eaten thousands of meals as a kid. It felt right, filling the house with laughter and conversation again. One Sunday, about a year after moving back in, I was in the garden planting tomatoes when Mrs. Patterson came over from next door. She'd brought me a welcome plant when I'd first moved back, and we'd developed a friendly relationship. Your father would be so happy to see what you've done with the place, she said, watching me work. It feels like a home again. I hope so, I said, brushing dirt off my hands. I'm trying to honor both of them, Mom and Dad, while also making it mine. She sat down on the garden bench I'd installed. Can I tell you something? Your father came to see me the night before his heart attack, the night before Vanessa called you in a panic, before everything changed. He brought me a bottle of wine and just talked for hours. What did he say? He said he'd been a fool, Mrs. Patterson recalled. He said he'd let loneliness make him stupid, and he'd hurt the one person in the world he should have protected above all else. He said he was going to fix it, that he'd already started the process. He was so hopeful, Rebecca, so determined to make things right with you. I felt tears prickling at my eyes. I wish he'd had more time. Me too, dear. But I think, in the end, he did make things right. Maybe not the way he'd planned, but he left you that letter. He left you the truth. And somehow, in some way we'll never fully understand, his wish to give you back what was yours came true. I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. Dad had wanted to fix things, had started the process before his heart gave out. And then, miraculously, through Vanessa's unexpected conscience, it had happened anyway. Maybe Mrs. Patterson was right. Maybe Dad had made things right after all, just in a more roundabout way. I also thought about Vanessa sometimes, though I tried not to. I wondered if she'd managed to change, if giving back what she'd stolen had been a turning point for her. Part of me hoped it had been. Part of me thought people like that didn't really change. But mostly, I tried not to care. She'd given me back my inheritance, my family home, my peace of mind. What she did with her own life after that was her business. 2 years after moving back into the house, I got a call from Dr. Chen's office. She was retiring and wanted to schedule a final session with all her long-term patients. When I went in, the office looked different. Boxes packed, walls bare. Rebecca, she said warmly, giving me a hug. Look at you, you look wonderful. I feel wonderful, I said honestly. I wanted to thank you for everything you did for me during the worst time of my life. You did the work, she said. I just provided the space for you to do it. Tell me, where are you now? How's life? I told her about the house, about my promotion at work to director level, about the garden and the cats and the Sunday dinners. I told her about a man I'd started dating, a contractor I'd met when I was renovating the kitchen, someone kind and stable and patient with my complicated family history. You've built a beautiful life, Dr. Chen said. Your parents would be so proud. I hope so, I said. I'm trying to honor them while also moving forward, you know? Not getting stuck in the past, but not forgetting it either. That's exactly right, she said. That's the balance. And Rebecca, I want you to remember something. What happened with your father, the estrangement, the will, all of it, that wasn't your fault. You were put in an impossible situation, and you handled it with grace and integrity. Never doubt that. Those words stayed with me. On the hard days, when I missed Dad so much it hurt, when I wondered if I could have done something differently, I remembered Dr. Chen saying I'd handled it with grace and integrity. I held on to that. I also started volunteering with a local organization that helped families dealing with elder fraud and manipulation. My story was, unfortunately, not uncommon. Lots of people had lost parents to scammers and manipulators, had watched helplessly as their relationships were destroyed by someone else's greed. I started speaking at support groups, sharing my experience, offering hope that healing was possible. The first time I stood up to share my story at a support group, my hands were shaking. The room was full of people who looked as lost and broken as I'd felt. I took a deep breath and told them everything. About Dad, about Vanessa, about the estrangement and the grief and the unexpected ending, about how I'd survived. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then a man in his 50s raised his hand. "How did you stop blaming yourself?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "My mother remarried last year, and she's cut me off completely. Every day I think about what I could have done differently." I looked at him, seeing my own pain reflected in his eyes. I stopped blaming myself when I realized that I did everything a loving daughter could do. I tried to protect my father. I set boundaries. I told him the truth. The fact that he couldn't hear me because of someone else's manipulation, that's not on me. And it's not on you either. A woman in the back started crying. "Thank you," she whispered. I needed to hear that. Over the months, I became a regular at these meetings. I'd show up every other Tuesday, share updates on my healing journey, listen to others share theirs. I started to recognize the patterns, the isolation, the financial manipulation, the way the scammer turned the parent against their children, the guilt and shame the adult children carried. One evening, I was speaking at a meeting when a woman about my age approached me afterward. "Thank you," she said through tears. "My mother just married someone like your father's Vanessa. She's cut me off completely, changed her will, won't return my calls. I've been feeling so alone, like I'm the only one going through this." "You're not alone," I told her, giving her a hug. "And I need you to hear this. It's not your fault. You can't force someone to see they're being manipulated. All you can do is be ready to support them when they figure it out themselves." "What if she doesn't figure it out before she dies?" the woman asked. "What if I never get to tell her I love her again?" I thought about Dad's letter, about those final words he'd written me. "Then you hold on to the love you had before," I said. "You remember that the person who cut you off isn't really your mother, not the mother you knew. That's the manipulation talking. Your real mother, the one who loved you, she's still in there. And she still loves you, even if she can't show it right now." The woman squeezed my hand. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." I started meeting some of the people from the group outside of meetings. Coffee dates where we'd talk about our progress, our setbacks, our small victories. A woman named Patricia, whose father had been scammed by a woman 30 years younger, became a close friend. We'd meet every Saturday morning at this little cafe, drink too much coffee, and support each other. Patricia was a few steps behind me in her journey. Her father was still alive, still with the woman who was manipulating him. She couldn't see him, couldn't talk to him. The helplessness was eating her alive. "How do you live with it?" she asked me one morning, stirring her coffee absently. "How do you get up every day knowing there's nothing you can do?" I thought about it carefully. You have to accept what you can and can't control. You can't control your father's choices. You can't force him to see the truth, but you can control how you respond. You can take care of yourself. You can build a support system. You can live your life fully, even while you're grieving. Because you are grieving, Patricia. You're grieving the relationship you had, even though your father is still alive. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I just miss him so much. I miss my dad." "I know," I said, reaching across the table to hold her hand. "I know." The organization eventually asked me to lead workshops for adult children dealing with elder manipulation. I developed a curriculum based on what I'd learned in therapy, what I'd experienced, what others had shared. We covered practical topics like recognizing red flags and documenting evidence, but also emotional topics like managing guilt and processing grief. One workshop, focused on forgiveness, was particularly powerful. I stood in front of 15 people and asked them to close their eyes. "Think about your parent," I said, "not as they are now, under manipulation, but as they were before. Remember who they were at their core. Remember how they loved you." The room was silent except for quiet crying. "Now think about this," I continued. "That person is still in there. The manipulation is like a fog, obscuring who they really are. Your parents' actions right now don't define their entire life. All those years of love, those don't disappear because of a few years of manipulation." After the workshop, a man named Robert approached me. He was probably in his 60s, His father in his late 80s. I haven't spoken to my father in 3 years, Robert said. His wife, his fourth wife, has convinced him that all his children are after his money. We're not. We just want our dad back. Have you tried reaching out? I asked. He nodded. Letters, emails, showing up at the house. She turns us away every time. My father won't even look at us. Last Christmas, I drove 8 hours to see him, and she called the police. I'm so sorry, I said. That must be devastating. Your story gives me hope, he said. That even if it's not until after he's gone, maybe someday I'll have proof that he never stopped loving us. That maybe he's trying, like your father was, but we just don't know it yet. Hold on to that, I told him, because it's probably true. These manipulators are experts at isolating their victims. But love that deep, the kind between a parent and child, it doesn't just disappear. It goes underground maybe, but it's still there. These conversations, helping other people navigate the same pain I'd experienced, gave new meaning to everything I'd been through. My suffering wasn't pointless. It had taught me something, changed me, made me able to help others. That felt important. That felt like honoring Dad's memory in a meaningful way. On the 3rd anniversary of Dad's death, I did something I'd been planning for months. I organized a memorial service at the house, a real one, the kind Dad would have wanted. I invited his old friends, his golf buddies, people from his church, neighbors who'd known him for decades. Mrs. Patterson came, of course. Julia and Marcus were there. Even my old high school English teacher, whom Dad had always liked, showed up. The morning of the memorial, I woke up early and spent hours preparing. I set up folding chairs in the backyard, arranged tables with photos of Dad throughout his life, baby pictures, wedding photos with Mom, pictures of the 3 of us on family vacations. I made sure to include pictures from before Vanessa, the dad everyone remembered and loved. Julia arrived early to help. She found me in the kitchen, arranging platters of food, and wrapped me in a hug. How are you holding up? She asked. I'm okay, I said, and meant it. This feels right, you know? Giving him the send-off he deserved. People started arriving around too. Dad's old golf buddies came as a group, all wearing their club shirts in his honor. They shared stories about his terrible golf swing, how he'd always buy the beer when they'd finish a round, how he'd been the steady one in their group, always ready to listen when someone needed to talk. He helped me through my divorce, one of them said, a man named Frank with white hair and kind eyes. Sat with me in my garage for hours, just listening while I talked through the pain. Never judged, never tried to fix it, just was there. That was Thomas. He showed up. Mrs. Patterson brought a photo album she'd compiled over the years of neighborhood gatherings. There were pictures of Dad at block parties, helping neighbors move, coaching kids' soccer teams even though I'd never played soccer. He was in the background of so many of these photos, always helping, always contributing, always part of the fabric of the community. People from Dad's church shared stories about his quiet generosity. He'd paid for funeral expenses for families who couldn't afford them. He'd organized meal trains for people recovering from surgery. He'd spent Sunday mornings teaching Sunday school to kindergartners, doing silly voices for Bible stories that made the kids laugh. Pastor Michael stood up and said, Thomas never made a big show of his faith. He didn't quote scripture or preach. He just lived it. He loved his neighbor as himself. He took care of the widows and orphans. He was the kind of man who made you believe in humanity. We gathered in the backyard, around the garden, and people shared memories. Stories about Dad's terrible jokes, his competitiveness at poker, his kindness to everyone he met. I shared the story of what had happened, the whole truth. About Vanessa, about the manipulation, about Dad's letter and his attempt to fix things before he died, about the unexpected redemption at the end. I took a deep breath before speaking, looking out at all these people who'd loved Dad. I need to tell you what really happened, I said. Why we had the funeral we did 3 years ago, and why we're having this memorial now. I told them everything. About how Vanessa had isolated Dad, changed him, convinced him to cut me off. About the heart attack and his last words to me. About the will that left me nothing. About the guilt and grief that had consumed me. But then I told them about the box Vanessa found. About Dad's letter. About how he'd been trying to make things right. About how he'd never stopped loving me. Never stopped being the man they all remembered. He'd just been lost for a while. The man I'm honoring today, I said, my voice breaking, isn't the man who pushed me away. It's the man who taught me to ride a bike and sat through terrible band concerts and cried at my graduation. It's the man who showed up for his community, who helped his friends, who kept every birthday card I ever made him. That's the Dad I want to remember. That's the Dad I know you all remember too. People cried, But they also laughed. They remembered the Thomas Mitchell who'd been a good man, a kind man, a man who'd made a mistake but had been trying to correct it. That was the father I wanted to remember, not the one who'd pushed me away, but the one who'd spent his last days trying to pull me back. Frank came up to me afterward and pulled me into a bear hug. "Your dad would be so proud of you," he said gruffly. "The grace you've shown, the forgiveness, the way you've honored his memory despite everything. That takes a special kind of strength." My old English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, found me as people were starting to leave. She'd been retired for years but had made the trip because she remembered how Dad had always volunteered for school events. He was at every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every fundraiser, she said. Even after your mom passed, he never missed. Some parents don't show up even when they have a partner. Your dad showed up double. That meant everything to me, I told her honestly, especially those first couple of years after Mom died. Knowing he was in the audience, that he cared about what I was doing. She smiled. He told me once that you were his reason for getting out of bed in the morning, that watching you grow and succeed made everything worth it. That was before Vanessa, obviously. But I want you to know that's who your father really was, a man who loved his daughter more than anything. After everyone left, I sat in the garden as the sun set. I thought about the journey I'd been on, from that awful night when Dad told me he was cutting me out of the will, through the grief and anger and estrangement, through his death and the devastating funeral, through the dark months that followed. I thought about Vanessa's panicked call, about the box of documents, about Dad's letter that had changed everything. I thought about the person I'd been 3 years ago, scared and hurt and drowning in grief, and I thought about the person I was now, strong and settled and at peace. The journey between those two people had been brutal, but it had also been necessary. I'd learned things about myself, about forgiveness, about resilience, that I never would have learned otherwise. Dad's letter was in my pocket, like it always was on hard days. I pulled it out and read it again, even though I'd long since memorized every word. "I'm so proud of you, Rebecca. You're my greatest achievement, my brightest light. You've always been the best thing I ever did. I love you too, Dad," I whispered to the evening air. "I forgive you, and I hope you can forgive me too." The wind picked up, rustling through the tomato plants I'd been tending, and I could swear I felt something like a presence, like Dad was there with me, like he was telling me he was proud of how I'd handled everything, proud of how I'd rebuilt my life, proud of the grace I'd managed to find even in the darkest moments. I stood up and looked at the house, lights glowing warmly in the windows, my home again. This was what surviving looked like. This was what thriving looked like. Not forgetting the pain, but not letting it define you either. Carrying the love and the lessons, but leaving the bitterness behind. Inside, Mango and Sage were probably wondering where their dinner was. I had work to do tomorrow, a presentation to give, a life to live. The contractor, David, was coming over for dinner on Friday, and I needed to plan what to cook. Julia wanted help planning her wedding. There were tomatoes to harvest, and bills to pay, and friends to call, and 1,000 ordinary, beautiful things that made up a life. I took one last look at the sunset, then headed inside. The house welcomed me with familiar creaks and smells, with memories in every corner, but also with space for new ones. I'd survived the worst thing I could imagine, losing my father twice, once to manipulation and once to death. But I'd also discovered I was stronger than I'd ever known, that love persists even through betrayal, that people are capable of both terrible mistakes and remarkable redemption. And standing in my kitchen, Mom's kitchen, Dad's kitchen, my kitchen, I realized something profound. I hadn't just inherited a house and some money. I'd inherited something more valuable, a legacy of resilience, of love, of the capacity to forgive and move forward. That was what Mom and Dad had really left me. That was the inheritance that truly mattered. I fed the cats, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat down at the kitchen table where I'd eaten breakfast before school for 18 years. I pulled out my laptop and opened a document I'd been working on, a guide for people dealing with elder manipulation and family estrangement. Maybe my story could help others find their way through the darkness, the way others' stories had helped me. As I typed, I thought about the question Dr. Chen had once asked me. Do you think you could have done anything differently? And I realized the answer was no. I'd done the best I could with the information and resources I had. I'd tried to protect Dad, even when it cost me our relationship. I'd maintained my integrity even when it would have been easier to just go along with Vanessa to keep the peace. I'd survived grief and betrayal and found my way back to hope. I'd done exactly what I needed to do. The house was quiet except for the sound of my typing and the cats purring on the couch. Outside, the garden was settling into the night, the tomatoes and herbs and flowers I'd planted growing strong and healthy. Inside, I was surrounded by memories and love and possibility. This was my life now. Not the one I'd planned or expected, but a good life nonetheless. A life built on hard-won wisdom, on forgiveness, on the understanding that people are complex and messy and capable of both hurting us and loving us, sometimes simultaneously. A life that honored where I'd come from while embracing where I was going. I saved the document and closed my laptop. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new ordinary moments that made up the texture of a life. But tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be. Home. Whole. At peace. And somewhere, I like to think, Dad was at peace too. Knowing I was okay, knowing I'd forgiven him, knowing that in the end, love had won out over manipulation and greed and all the forces that had tried to tear us apart. We'd found our way back to each other, even across the boundary of death. That was enough. That was everything.